Today's lesson is whether or not we need to store our opals in water. Coming up next. Okay, so reaching back into the bag of questions from our subscribers. I really love you guys because you do ask excellent questions. This one comes in from Argentux, and he asks, "Hello, Paul. Do you know the reason that they say to store Ethiopian opals in water?" Well, first of all, you can find out more information on the Ethiopian opals on lesson or episode 15, which is on Ethiopian opals. So first of all, before I get into specifically Ethiopian opals, what is an opal? An opal is a hydrated silica, an amorphous gem. And so what does that mean when I say it's hydrated? Well, opals have water in them, somewhere between 5 to maybe up to 20% water. And actually, it's the silica and the relationship with that water that makes that play of color. But let's delve into this a little bit deeper, because is there a difference between the Ethiopian opal and the Australian opal? I get a little into that in the lesson that I've done on Ethiopian opals. But for the purposes of now, I want to show you this one opal here that is a beautiful play of color opal from Australia. And now the next one I'm showing you here is an Ethiopian opal. And now as I present them side by side, you're realizing you probably really couldn't tell the difference between the two, but they do have differences. Number one, most of your Australian opals are going to be non-porous. When I talk about a porous gem, like when I talk about turquoise, and that's why they do that stabilizing process, because it can absorb oils from your skin or water or anything like that. Opals from Australia are not porous. I remember talking to a great expert friend of mine. His name is Peter Vida, who had mining interests in Australia, and I visited the mine a couple of times. And he said a lot of people have misconceptions about the water and should you rub oil on your opals. He says that's a really bad idea. He said when they are polishing the opal up, it's a natural barrier also for the water. But basically, Australian opals are non-porous. When you get into Ethiopian opals, they're what they call a hydrophane opal. And it actually has a higher water content, and it's porous. So it can absorb water or have some of the water leach out or dry out over time. Now, you don't want an opal to become really dry and crack, but once again, when the opal has been out of the ground for a while, it's less likely to craze or crack. But more importantly, when it's polished, it's probably not going to let water seep into it anymore. So why do people think that we need to store our opals in water? Well, there's no real compelling reason to do so, not for the health of the gem. In other words, yes, when you're going to gem shows and you have a lot of hot lights on something and you're worried about, perhaps especially with an Ethiopian opal, that you might dry it out, you might want to store them in water jars so that can't happen. The likelihood that it's really going to do anything is almost non-existent. But here is the real reason, I think, and I've experienced, why a lot of times you'll see opal in water, especially in little jars when you go to a show. And it's simply this. Opals exhibit something called play of color, and it is a doubly refractive gem. I remember taking a class at the Tucson Gem Show one time from a famous photographer named Fred Ward, and he was talking about how specifically to photograph opals. And he said the best way to photograph an opal is if it's underwater. And I have had Ethiopian opals in a jar with no water in them, and they look okay. When I add the water to them and you look at it, you see much, much greater play of color. So I think most of the reasons when you go to a show and you see it stored in water, it's because it's a better way to see. In fact, let me add on to that one more comment. Any gem, when you're going to a lot of gem shows, even if you're going where they're just showing how rough, they usually have a water bottle there. Why? Because if you take a rough, it can look like a rock or just something dirty, and when you spray it, it gives you the sort of the look of it, what it would be if you finished that gem by polishing it. So water in gems, in the gem business, especially in the rough business, is very important. But to answer your question in a long-winded way, there's no real compelling reason that you must store your opals in water. I hope that clears it up. Thank you so much. Keep those questions coming, and I'll keep these the series of short Q&As continuing throughout the holidays. Thank you so much for watching. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so. It doesn't cost you a penny to subscribe. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next lesson of these Gemstones. Thanks for watching, everybody.